Wing it.
Been saving up your hatred for eons, just waiting.
It has. It's been like 35 years.
You got me beat there. I've only been reading these for 18. Do you like any of other Gaiman's work, like his novels or anything? Or you just
I do.
like,
Those are my flags.
American Gods is one of my favorites. I have mixed feelings about this series.
Welcome to the Funny Pages. My name is Sean Devereux. I am your host of this brand new comic book talk show. This is a show where we are going to be talking about comics. It is brought to you by the Push Comedy Theater, Earprov, and the Nerds of Comedy. And today we are joined by a very special guest, Miss Kelly Vigilante. And with us, as always, is our tech person extraordinaire, Matt Cole. And today we are talking about Neil Gaiman's Sandman. So when I got this idea for the Funny Pages, I threw out to all my friends in the Push Comedy Theater about what comic book stories do they like, what are the characters' story arcs that really kind of speak to them personally, something that they have a personal connection with. And Kelly, you came back almost immediately with the Sandman. Now, before we get into this, before we start talking about Sandman, what is your kind of like history with comic books? Are you just a Sandman fan, or do you like other comics as well?
It started when I was little, and I started getting Archie comics, Ren and Stimpy, Simpsons, and like reading all of those. And then I started dating nerds. They had comic books. I got into them. Sandman and the Max were the first ones I got into.
Okay.
And so they have a very special place in my heart.
Awesome. So I threw out the request for people, and you came back immediately with Sandman, and instantly a little part of my soul died because I cannot stand Sandman. I've been, and we'll caveat this in a second, but I've been reading comic books since I was a child. So since the early 80s, I am, or was at times, a very avid collector. I have probably, I have a storage unit in Virginia Beach that is wall to ceiling full of comic books, mostly DC, but also some Marvel. And Sandman is definitely DC, and as we're going to find out, has actually some ties to the DC universe. But part of me has just always disliked Sandman, to the point that I've never read a Sandman comic book until this show, in preparation for this show. So before we get into my psychological trauma, tell me what it is about Sandman that you love so much.
Well, to quote Matt Cole from a few minutes ago, I'm a little goth kid at heart.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I may not dress like it, but it's like, I love that kind of stuff that's kind of a like death, and I really like fantasy, and I like Neil Gaiman's writing, just kind of otherworldly, and that's kind of my bag. And it's whimsical, it's historical, it's got the crone, the mother, the maiden. I'm a sucker for that motif.
So where were you, or when were you when you first discovered the Sandman comic books?
I was in my first boyfriend's bedroom, and he
Nice.
and he had left. I was 17. He had left to go to his class at TCC, and he left me with the Max comics and Sandman comics. And as soon as I started reading the Sandman, I was obsessed.
So tell people who aren't familiar with the Sandman, what is, or who is Sandman?
Okay, so there's 7 of the endless, right? There's destiny, there's death, there's dream, there's destruction, there's desire, despair, and delirium. who used to be Delight, and that's its whole arc itself. And Dream is the third of the Endless. And it basically follows adventures based around dreams, problems that might emerge, abductions, love interest, and then eventually, spoiler alert, the birth of a brand new dream.
Yes, which is what kind of has always kind of pushed my buttons when it comes to me not liking the Sandman. You had asked me right before, is it just the Sandman or Neil Gaiman that I dislike? And it is literally just the Sandman. I am a big fan of Neil Gaiman's work, his novels, even his comic book work. He did a great, really, really good Secret Origin of the Riddler. It was in a Secret Origin special where he kind of like deconstructed the Riddler and kind of made all the Riddlers, like the Batman Adam West TV show Riddler, made that make sense with the more kind of darker version of the Riddler that we have in modern times. It was really kind of cool. So I do like Green Lantern, Neil Gaiman, but for some reason I've always had problems with Sandman. I think part of it is the name. I'm a big fan of Golden Age superheroes, which there was a Golden Age Sandman in the 1940s. There was another Sandman in the 1970s, which kind of ties into the story arc we are going to talk about. So I'm always a little put off when, again, this was my I think Sandman came out in '89. So I was probably 17 years old when it came out. So I was a very artsy fartsy, very pretentious theater kid. Goth hadn't come around, but if goth was a thing, I would have been pretty close to being goth. I dressed all in black. I didn't do like the eyeliner or anything like that, but I was pretty close. So I was very offended that some English guy was coming over here and taking one of these American superhero names for his own creation. So that was going through my mind when I was 17 years old when Sandman came out. But you suggested that I read the second arc, which was it Welcome to the Dollhouse?
It was I believe I have it right here actually. It's just the Doll's House, and this
okay, the Doll's House, yes.
Yeah.
So the Doll's House, it encompasses I believe issues 9 through, I had it here a second ago. I took notes as I was doing this. I think 9 through
15.
With the first story actually not necessarily being part of the story, but give us like, again, and there will be spoilers all over the place for people watching, so be prepared. But give us just like a very kind of brief overview about this story arc.
It's kind of all over the place.
It really is, yeah.
Yeah. There's a bunch of vignettes kind of thrown together, but really it's about a vortex that occurs. I don't know if it was once, I just read it, I should know, once a century or once in a while. And basically it can make all dreams kind of collapse together, and it can mess up everybody's mental health, the dreaming, all that kind of stuff.
And so the vortex takes the form of a human being.
Yeah, exactly. And that focuses on a girl, Rose, and it kind of just shows her journey looking for her little brother. She stumbles upon a serial killer convention. There are 4 archetypes that have escaped from Dream's realm that are wreaking havoc on the real world, and he's trying to fetch them. They're interacting with Hector and Lita Hall that are bastardizations of what Sean likes. And there's also some short stories about this guy who meets with Sandman once every century. And it's just got all kinds of interesting tidbits.
It's true. So the main story arc of Doll's House is Sandman, or Morpheus, I guess is his name, who kind of looks like a cross between Robert Smith of The Cure and Brandon Lee's The Crow. if they had a baby, you would get Morpheus. He's trying to find these various archetypes that have escaped the endless or the dream realm. And then you have Rose trying to find her little brother, who ends up being abducted by a serial killer, and which leads them all to a serial killer convention, which I thought was the most interesting part of the book. It's weird. Sandman or Morpheus isn't really a key figure in this arc. He's not the main character. I would say Rose is probably the main character, and you spend it feels like you spend more time with all these other characters that Rose comes across, and not really with Morpheus.
Yeah, now that you're saying that, I'm like, should I have suggested another copy? But you wanted to focus on Hal and Lita, and I'm like, this is where they get.
I did.
Okay.
which I am completely fine with that, but I think it's I think what it is that I left the story not really knowing really what Sandman or Morpheus is about, other than he does come across as kind of an asshole.
And he is. He's very. There's definitely an arc. He's very cold and distant. I'm sorry, did I interrupt? I'll stop.
No. He there's so the story starts out with there's a good picture of Morpheus. Like I said, he does have this kind of weird Crow meets Robert Smith vibe to him. But the first story in this arc is it's actually a tale told about Morpheus. He does I guess millennia ago, there was an African princess who fell in love with Morpheus, and he falls in love with her, but she realizes that if they stay together, that it would end up dooming her kingdom. So she kind of rejects him. So in retaliation, he sends her to hell, which was a really kind of, and I mean, it gets kind of dark. Like, doesn't she she breaks her own hymen because if she does that, she hopes that Morpheus will think that she's not a virgin, so he won't want her. Like I said, some really kind of dark, interesting stuff going on there, but doesn't really paint him in a good light.
Well, that's one of the things I love about the Sandman series, and like a lot of shows like Schitt's Creek, you've got to start out with like not so great characters so there can be an arc, right?
Yeah.
And so he becomes, I want to say, more human and like softer. And I think that's one of the things that prompts his metamorphosis at the end and becoming kind of a new Sandman, even taking on the color of white versus black, because he's supposed to be more hopeful and more about compassion and stuff like that.
Well, from what I've read, the first two arcs, so the Doll's House is his kind of like second major story arc. The first two arcs kind of like set up all the pieces and the characters that you will now be seeing through the rest of the the rest of his story, which again lasted like 70 something issues. So it was he stuck with it for quite a while, and it does have an ending, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right? Yeah,
it does.
Which is something you don't at that time in the early 90s, the late 80s. You really didn't see that so much in mainstream publishers. A lot of times, a writer or an artist would come in for a few years, but then move on and somebody else would take over the character. This is one of those instances where Gaiman was able to tell the story he wanted to tell from start to finish. And then, although some of the periphery characters have shown up in places, I think he had some deal that only he's allowed to write stories about Morpheus, or he has final approval about what happens to Morpheus as a character, which again was really kind of unheard of back in that point of time in comic books. But then, so let's get to the serial killer convention, because this was my favorite part of the story. And this one, I will say that I was a huge kind of fan of this idea. There's this convention at a motel, much like, like it could be a comic book convention or a sci-fi convention or something like that. But it is literally a convention for serial killers. And they have panels, and you see them like hanging out in the lobby just talking about like the craziness of their jobs and stuff like that. And I thought that was a really, really kind of cool idea.
I really enjoyed it as well, because it's kind of like, and I am going to call this up, it's kind of like in improv scenes where you put like kind of absurd characters in regular, ordinary circumstances, and just seeing, them get drunk and dance and, just talk and shoot the shit, as you were saying, was just a really interesting take on it.
It really was. I would say the only thing that I was disappointed in is that I wanted more. I thought that he could have kind of delved into this a lot more, because at the end of the day, it really, it was kind of like an interesting set piece, but it really didn't have that much impact with the rest of the story. She gets, it just so happens that Rose is there looking for her brother. So it turns out her brother was taken away from the family by her father when she was younger, and her brother was about 6. And then the father died, and her brother has been raised by some second cousins, but they have him kind of chained in the basement and are accepting like welfare payments on his behalf. So they're not very nice people, but the brother eventually escapes and actually ends up getting picked up by one of the serial killers and brought to the convention. But yeah, I would say I just wanted more of this serial killer convention.
I would love to have seen a different like spin-off, or like just a couple of like maybe 2 shots. Like they did a couple of graphic novels about Death being the main feature, his sister, who unfortunately you don't see a lot in this version because she's amazing. But like doing like 2 offshoots just of these serial killers and the convention concept, because that was such a dark and interesting, titillating idea.
It really was. And so one of the serial killers is the Corinthian, who turns out is one of the escapees from the Dreaming. And his thing is that he rips out the eyeballs of his victims, and he's always wearing sunglasses. But at some point in time, he takes the sunglasses off and he has teeth for eyes. It's a really kind of cool, very disturbing visual. And from what I've kind of, again, the research I've done, it looks like the Corinthian comes back in future story arcs down the line. But he definitely gave me enough that I could see myself searching out more Sandman stories just to follow the Corinthian.
It's kind of funny because I feel like in a lot of shows, and I'm just going to quote Buffy real quick because that's my obsession, it's like the main characters is oftentimes the least likable, like JD and Scrubs, etc. And then it's the side characters I feel like you get the most attached to. And I feel like there are just so many to latch on to in the Sandman series.
That is true. And I will say that he does a really good job of creating all these very interesting characters. So halfway through the story arc, they kind of take a break from the main storyline, and there's a 1-issue story where Dream and his sister, I believe it is Death, they're in the 1300s, and they overhear a man boasting about how he never wants to die. So they decide to grant his wish and make this guy immortal. And every 100 years, the Sandman and this guy meet at a bar, and the guy just kind of describes what his life has been over that time. And again, I thought that was really, really kind of cool. Like I would love to see a little mini series about this guy, living life as an immortal. And you kind of find out that he, at one point in time, he had got married and had kids, but they've since died. And he made a lot of money, lost a lot of money. He's been to war. He, at one point in time, was a slave trader, which, he carries tremendous guilt about. So again, some really kind of all these really interesting seeds that are planted in this one story that I was like, yes, this is what I want more of. But you're right. Yeah, Morpheus isn't a very likable character, but he is the center point for all these other really kind of cool creative characters. Another thing Gaiman did is back in the 70s and early 80s, DC Comics had a lot of horror anthology books. There was like House of Secrets and House of Mystery and things like that. And they were each hosted by a character, kind of like the Crypt Keeper from Tales from the Crypt. But he ended up taking all of those characters and bringing them into the Sandman comic book. So in it are Cain and Abel are two characters that live in the Endless. And Cain was the host of one horror anthology book, and Abel was the host of another anthology book. The Raven,
Matthew.
is actually a character from Swamp Thing. So he does draw a lot of stuff from what do you call it? A lot of characters from the wider DC universe, which kind of leads me to what initially spurred my hatred for the Sandman. And as we're doing this, Matt has been great. He's been showing various covers from the stories that we are talking about. But we also have set up a phone line. So if you guys want to call in later in the show with your own thoughts and opinions about the Sandman, please do. Matt will go ahead and put the number in the comment section so you guys can call in if you'd like. But so at one point in time, so we alluded to this, but Rose's brother, Jed, is being held by his evil second cousins. And he's been in his own little dream world. And in that dream world is Hector and Lydia Hall, who are these kind of superheroes that are like his protectors in this dream world. And Hector and Lydia Hall were characters from a book that I loved when I was reading comics back in the 80s called Infinity Incorporated. And when I found that they were, there's a picture of them, Hector, at one point in time, Hector adopts the costume and the powers of the 1970s Sandman. That was the 70s Sandman costume that he's wearing right there. But when I heard that this pretentious British writer had taken two characters from a book that I loved and used them as very much secondary characters in his book, especially I think Hector, I don't think he really shows up much after this one arc. I know Lydia does, but yeah, I was very hurt and offended, and that started my hate for the Sandman, all because of Infinity Incorporated, which we're going to talk about now. So I had to endure reading Sandman, so I made Kelly endure reading Infinity Incorporated, the first story arc from that, which rereading was it was kind of a slog. It was not an easy read. So And so for those who don't know, Infinity Incorporated are the sons and daughters of the Justice Society of America. The Justice Society of America was the very first superhero team ever. Was made up of heroes from the 1940s of DC Comics. You had Green Lantern, you had Flash, Wonder Woman, the Atom, Batman, Superman were all members of the Justice Society. They had their own comic book, All Star Comics, that ran from 1940 all the way up to the late 40s, early 50s. And then when the superhero fad kind of died out, as when they all kind of died out as well. But DC brought all these old heroes back in the late 70s and gave them their own book, and then but kept them as their old age. So you were reading stories of a Wonder Woman in her early 60s, and a Flash in his early 60s, but then decided to give them kids. And Infinity Incorporated was this second generation of superheroes. So had you any experience with any of these Golden Age heroes or anything like that? Yeah, I literally threw you into the deep end of the pool.
Well, like, I know who Green Lantern and Wonder Woman are, but like the Star Spangled Kid, I know there's a lot of DC and Marvel characters that kind of echo each other. So I'm like, that is a lame version of Captain America.
Kind of, yes. And even better, so like you're familiar with Wonder Woman, but nowhere does it say like, this is an alternate Earth from, because they literally said all these stories are set on Earth 2. So Earth 1 is the main Earth where when you pick up a Batman comic book or a Superman comic book, and Superman's in his early 30s or whatever, that's an Earth 1 Superman. Earth 2 is where they decided that if these heroes had started out in the 1940s and aged normally, all those stories are going to be on Earth 2. So that's how you can explain the fact that Superman was alive, during World War II and fighting Nazis and stuff. So anything from the 1940s to the 1950s stories are still canon, but they were set on Earth 2. Any modern day stories are set on Earth 1. And it got really way more convoluted from there. That's just the most basic version I can give you. But you are reading a comic book where Wonder Woman has gray hair, where Robin is like, a man in his, his mid 20s to early 30s. So basically this story is the sons and daughters of the Justice Society want to join the JSA, and the old fogies say, no, you're not ready. So they decide that they're going to form their own team. And while that happens, the Justice Society end up being controlled by an evil villain in the form of a giant white ape. And the younger heroes now have to fight their parents. That's the story in a nutshell. Only it took 10 issues, which was this is old style comic book storytelling where it took forever for anything to really happen in this book.
I noticed that Matt Cole put a picture of the pimp attacking the young heroes, and I appreciate that.
Yes, so that comes from so issue 1 is you meet. It starts out with the Justice Society. They're having their annual Christmas meeting, discussing what's going on, blah blah blah. When these young kids burst in, and again, while like Wonder Woman has a daughter and she knows her daughter has powers, this is the first time the daughter has put on a costume. So none of the Justice Society knows any of these people who come barging into their headquarters. So you have your typical kind of fight to begin with. But the first issue is them wanting to join the JSA and the JSA saying no. The second issue is these younger heroes sulking and going to some diner and getting into a fight with a bunch of prostitutes and pimps. And that's pretty much the entire second issue, is them beating up some prostitutes, which was...
Can I tell you my favorite part of that whole sequence?
Yes.
Of the prostitute fight is God, I can't remember his name now because it was weird, but it's a really tall guy with the red mohawk, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
When they get into the fight,
yeah.
They knock over his food, and his reaction is my burgers.
There's a lot of dialogue, a lot of angst. So Hector Hall is later taken by Neil Gaiman, is the son of the original Hawkman and Hawkgirl, and he's really kind of a dick. Like,
he really is.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I forgot when I was reading it, is that he is really an asshole. And Lydia, or Hippolyta, is the daughter of Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor, and she's not much better. I would say none of these new heroes come across all that great. Was Norda, who is the kind of the godson of Hawkman. He's a half human and half bird person. He comes from a race of bird people. Mm-hmm. He comes across as okay, fairly likable. The Huntress, which is the daughter of Batman and Catwoman, comes out okay. And then you have Power Girl, who's the cousin of Superman. So instead of her being Supergirl, they gave her the name Power Girl.
But I just think it's hilarious that she's talking about, oh, I was on one of the same spaceships as Superman, but mine was just slower.
Yeah. Which is, I don't know if her dad, when he was building the spaceship, if he used substandard parts or what it is. So then the next couple issues, they go on to kind of go into detail the origin of all these new heroes, which again takes forever. At one point, the character of Norda, they actually reprint in full a comic book from the 1940s, a Hawkman comic book, where you find out how Hawkman discovered these bird people and then ends up bringing one of his scientist friends to live with the bird people, and that's where you get Norda. But it takes a while for anything to start to really happen, which again is not your typical, it wouldn't fly with modern day standards. And then from there, the Ultra Humanite has discovered the stream of ruthlessness, which again is a throwback to a comic book from the 1940s, an old Justice Society adventure, where the Justice Society are drowned by Superman in this stream because Superman's mind is being controlled, and they do use the word ruthlessness enough. They throw that word around like it's an everyday word. Like, I don't think I've ever said the word ruthless or ruthlessness as much as I have seen in this comic book. But it just turns the Justice Society into like the worst versions of themselves. And then literally for the next 6 issues, it's just Infinity Incorporated battling their parents to try to get them to turn back to being good. But like I said, it was a slog to get through.
Yeah, and so many of the bottom of the comics are like, reference this issue for what we're talking about. And I'm like, oh my goodness, do I need like a card catalog?
Well, you do, which again is one of those things that at the time I really liked about this. So the writer of Infinity Incorporated is a guy named Roy Thomas, who started out, he was like an uber comic book fan, but eventually he started doing work at Marvel and became the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. He kind of replaced Stan Lee when Stan Lee stepped down. And did a lot of stuff over at Marvel. But then when his contract was up, he came over to DC, and it was kind of a big coup for DC to get him. But he actually had kind of a deal with DC that Neil Gaiman had with Sandman. So Roy Thomas said, I want all these Golden Age heroes that you're not really doing anything with, and let me tell my stories. So they make reference to a book, All-Star Squadron. At some point in time, the Infinity Heroes go back in time, which I didn't include those issues in the issues I sent over to you because they show up in 2 issues of another multi-part story that you really didn't need. It was just going to be more confusing if I sent those around. But so at the time, he was writing 2 books. He was writing a Justice Society book called The All-Star Squadron that was set in World War II, the 1940s. That went on for 60-something issues. And then he had Infinity Incorporated that went on for close to 60 issues. And he was the sole writer for both. Again, which is kind of rare. Normally, a writer will stick around for 10 to 20 issues and move on. So it was fairly rare for this guy to have that much. And he was the editor of his own books. So he really didn't have anybody telling him this doesn't make sense, or maybe you should take this 10-part story and cut it down to 3, which you could probably, throw away a lot of stuff and not lose anything. But you're right. He references some really super obscure stories. And again, this is pre-internet. So I have referred to myself as the Indiana Jones of comic books. I was a nerd who I had a notebook that anytime any reference was made, I would write it down. And then anytime I would go to the public library, I would search old books about the history of comics to try to find out anything I could about these old stories.
Speaking of Indiana Jones, aren't our good friends Alfred Crane and Bobby Mercer doing something about Indiana Jones on another channel as well?
They are. Let's cross promote. They are doing a podcast called Performance Enhancing Films, where they are talking about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So you can find that at the Performance Enhancing Films Facebook page. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So at some point in time, Neil Gaiman decides to take the Silver Scarab, who at this point in time eventually goes by the name Infinity in Infinity Incorporated, he goes by the name of Sandman. He takes the 77.
That's what confused me, because you said to just read the first 2, and all he was called was the Silver Scarab, and I was like, why is he mad?
Yeah. So eventually he goes by the name of Sandman, but he takes Lydia or Fury is her superhero name, and Sandman, and kind of locks them into the Sandman world where they really can't be used by anything else. Eventually, he lets go because Hector Hall really doesn't show up anymore in the Sandman books. In the early 2000s, he reappears. They come up with a new Justice Society comic book, and they're allowed to start using Hector Hall again. But all the other members of Infinity Incorporated to this day are still fairly they're no longer in Infinity Incorporated, but they've become members of the Justice League. Some of them have their own comics. All the characters have gone on to do something, except for Fury, because she's still kind of locked away in the Endless, which is why I've always had this kind of mad on for Neil Gaiman.
See, I assumed it was AU, so I didn't think it would affect anything mainstream. I had no idea.
It was. And what's weird is when Infinity Incorporated came out in 1984, so it came out a good 5 years before Sandman. It was considered at that point in time, it was considered like a prestige book. So you could only buy it at a comic book shop. and it was on special paper, and it was more expensive. So a normal comic in the day would cost 75 cents, but Infinity Incorporated and a few other books at the time cost $1.25. So it was more expensive. It was on better, almost like cardstock paper, but the only way you could get it was at a comic book store. So at 13 years old, I would have to beg my mom every week to drive me to the comic book store. So I didn't have all the issues. So it took me a long time to eventually collect the entire run of Infinity Incorporated. So by the time I got to the issues where, or basically what I found out that Lydia and Hector Hall were now in Sandman, the Infinity Incorporated book had already been canceled. So I don't know why I was so upset. In my mind, I thought that it got canceled and immediately these characters were ripped away into Sandman. But I think there was a good year gap, almost a year and a half between Infinity Incorporated being canceled and Neil Gaiman decided to use these two characters that weren't being used by anyone anymore. But because I was still kind of collecting them in back issues, it was all very current for me. So rereading this stuff and looking at the timelines, I still have no idea why I was so angry. For some reason in my mind, I thought Neil Gaiman canceled Infinity Incorporated, but it turns out that was not the case at all.
Is the wound still fresh, Sean?
It is a little fresh. It still kind of is. Now, I was surprised at how much of a slog it was getting through those issues. And Roy Thomas, the writer, holds a lot of reverence to all the old 1940s stories and the 1940s style of storytelling. Because this is something you see in the later issues, is that there's one issue where Huntress, who is the daughter of Batman and Catwoman, goes off to fight Robin. Then there is another issue where Hector goes off to fight his dad, Hawkman. So the Jade and Obsidian, which are the children of the Green Lantern, they have an issue where they go and fight Green Lantern. So back in the olden days of the Justice Society would meet. They would find out whatever the big villain was or whatever the big problem was, and then they would all go off individually. So it was never like you would ever read a story where, even though they were on the same team, Flash and Green Lantern would never be on the same adventure. They would go off, have these separate adventures that all tied into the main story, and then they would come back at the end. So he definitely apes that type of storytelling. In this is where each individual Infinitor or member of Infinity Incorporated goes off to fight an individual member of the Justice Society. It's only in the very last issue that you just get this massive team up type battle, which again, you could have cut all of that and jumped to the last issue with the team up battle, and that would have been a lot more cool. In the comments. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, let's hear what's in the comments.
I was saying that William Curry wrote in saying that Vigilante was another book around the same time that got that special treatment. The Teen Titans had their own special treatment book, Legion of Superheroes. So there was like a handful of books that got this special treatment, which were the ones that I wanted the most because they are the ones I couldn't really have because 7-Eleven wouldn't carry them. That's where I would get all my comics, would be 7-Eleven, except for these special books. What were you gonna say? I'm sorry.
Honestly, I don't remember. Oh, I was gonna say there were a couple of things that made me very sure this book was from 1984. A couple of things that didn't age well. May I tell you about them?
Yes, please do.
There's one line when somebody meets Obsidian and they call him Old Blackface.
Yes,
that was something I noticed.
Mm-hmm.
And then this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
There's the Robin Huntress fight. Like he beats the crap out of out of her. Like in modern day comics, very rare do you see a male hero or a villain punching a female hero or villain. Like, Green Lantern might shoot her with his his power ring or something like that, or Flash might run around real fast and he's fighting a female villain, tie her up. But very rarely will you see a male hero literally punching a woman in the face. Now granted, which I don't know why that just stuck out for me, because I mean Robin beats up the Huntress pretty bad. Like she's got like a bloody face and stuff like that, which was weird for me seeing. What other weird ones came across?
This is probably just me being gross, but there was a quote where Jade's talking to Northwind and he's trying to get Hector's approval. He's like, "Why won't you love me? I'm your half brother." And then Jade says to Northwind, she says, "Whatever your problem is, I doubt it you'll get it solved by going down on your knees." That's just me, I'm sure. I get what she meant, but I thought it was hilarious.
And again, the whole prostitute fight is so weird. Like
it was.
And because the heroes kind of like come across as dicks in this.
Yeah.
It's just very, very strange. Like rereading these, I realized that Hector was my least favorite of all the members of Infinity Incorporated, which is why I don't understand. I was so upset at Neil Gaiman for taking him, because I'm like, looking back at it, I should have been glad that he was gone. Like I said, I still have a deep, deep love for these heroes from Infinity Incorporated, but it's just weird rereading it because again, it's almost 30 years, 35 years later. Yeah, it came out in '84. Just how drastically storytelling has changed.
Yeah. No, for sure. I was not expecting, like with DC, I guess, they kind of had that squeaky clean image, which is why I thought like Vertigo kind of formed in the first place.
Yes.
But I was not expecting to see pimps and hoes. And then I think it was Power Girl or maybe Huntress who makes a comment about junkies, and how awful they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I guess that's what happens when you have a white dude in his probably late 40s writing what he thinks like teenagers are like and what the inner city is like as well. That being said, I actually got to meet Roy Thomas a few years back at San Diego Comic-Con. All right, so before we go, Matt, are there any other comments that popped up? I saw more of William Curry. There's a great fight. That's true. Did you just read? I can't remember. Did you just read the first two issues of Infinity Incorporated?
Yeah, you said to read the first.
Yeah, just at least the first two.
I just read the first two.
There is in I think issue 4 or 5. There is a fight with Solomon Grundy, who is an old Green Lantern villain who then became a villain on Challenge of the Super Friends. But they give his origin in the Infinity Incorporated comic book, which is pretty cool. Will Harris says that Jerry Ordway, who is the artist on the book, follows him on Twitter, which is actually really kind of cool.
Wow.
That was something else. They actually, what I did like is they would have, like, it was weird. They would have a pinup in the back of each issue. I'm not sure if they had it in 1 or 2, but in the other issues, they have a pinup where they kind of like highlight each member of the group and kind of like give their stat sheet and then a cool piece of artwork, which they wouldn't do in normal newsstand comic books.
That's neat.
So if you were to recommend Sandman to somebody, tell them why they should go out and check out Sandman. Because again, I'm still not 100% convinced, so you have to convince me.
Oh, geez, that's a high order.
Mhm.
I guess I would say if you would like a dark, fantastical ride through extensive lore building, a lot of Easter eggs and stories that call back on each other, that will definitely spark your imagination and your lexicon. I definitely recommend it.
Okay, awesome. So what other arcs should people check out? So there, we read The Dollhouse, and there she goes. She goes to get um,
I'm just getting my book.
visual aids.
Okay.
I'm right. I'm vamping while you're gone. All right, there.
Okay. No, sorry, I've got some Scarlet Witch comics just hanging out. Like, let me see. Is this the one I'm thinking of? If you want to go further into the Endless, I definitely recommend Endless Nights. It goes into each sibling and a story inspired by them ad nauseum. And that's really cool. Like, if you want to figure out more about delirium or desire, there's all kinds of stories about that, which I think is kind of interesting. And if you're a Sandman fan, it's a must have.
Hmm.
I think Matt Cole and I were actually talking about the Kindly Ones, the thickest volume. And it's kind of where all the action and things that are set in stone in the Sandman comic kind of hit a climax. Oh, and there's your friend. This is the new version of the Corinthian. So
Oh,
there he
there.
is, just for you, Sean.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. And I'm kind of a sucker because I'm a big Shakespeare fan.
Hmm.
Volume 3 has a version of Midsummer's Night Dream, and it calls back on that bargain you saw him making with Shakespeare, which is one thing I love, how so many things call upon each other.
That is true. So, again, from what I have read, these first two story arcs are all about him planting seeds that will then come to fruition later on down the line. Now, for me, if you are interested in Infinity Incorporated, you can check out the Generation Saga on Amazon. It is the first half, the first 5 issues of the Infinity Incorporated story arc. Unfortunately, they never came out with a volume 2, so which is weird. So instead of that, I have 2 books called Justice Society, and these are stories about the JSA that were written in the late 1970s, and kind of lead up to what's going on at the start of Infinity Incorporated. So you do have pretty much all the Justice Society members that you see in Infinity Incorporated are in these 2 books right here. And again, these are some of these are written by Roy Thomas. He didn't really take over the World War II era heroes until the early 80s, but they're pretty cheap on Amazon, so definitely well worth your time to check out. Kelly, thank you very much for being part of the Funny Pages, our second ever episode. And it is because of you that I broke down and ended my 35-year drought of the Sandman.
Are you going to read it? I have
I
all the
might.
issues.
I may, like I said, the Corinthian definitely interests me. I do want to find out what happens to Lydia and her unborn child. Um, Although, again, I don't think good things happen to her as a character in this series for the little things that I've read. I do remember in the 90s, I think one of the other reasons why I was kind of anti Sandman is because Death, his sister, was like the it girl of comics. Like, she was always on like the cover of Wizard magazine. I don't know what it was about Death, but she was like your prototypical like goth girl. I
She's a
believe.
manic pixie goth girl, and she
There you
makes you want to
go.
be friends with Death. She has a great love for community and just a zesty personality. Until you've read her, I don't think you can judge her because she's
That's
amazing.
true. And I've learned not to judge a book by its cover, because as much as I love Infinity Incorporated, it is really tough to to read through those. Looking back again, I have this kind of like, you know what it is when you watch a movie that you loved as a kid, but then show it to somebody who's never seen it for the first time, and they're like, I don't get it. What's the big deal?
My
I think
husband showed me Goonies and I didn't get it because I didn't watch it as a kid, and he will never forgive me for that.
For me, I lost a girlfriend who showed me the Neverending Story. For some reason, I never saw the Neverending Story when I was a kid, and this was her favorite movie, and she saw it to me, and I think I fell asleep through it, and she was like, "We're done. If you don't love the Neverending Story, then we can't be together."
Wow.
Yeah, but it's what happens. So this has been the Funny Pages. Join us next week where we are going to be joined by Jordan Burton to talk about the Black Panther, which is also another hero that I never read many of his stuff. Not because I have a hate on for him like I did Sandman. It's just for some reason I just never came across very many, why can't I speak, very many Black Panther comics. So if you would like to be on the Funny Pages, drop me a note in the comments or email me at sean@pushcomedytheater.com and tell me about a hero or a series or a story arc that really kind of speaks to you as a comic book fan. And I would love to talk about it with you. Please check out all the cool things that are coming up on earprov.com. What do we have this week, Matt, this weekend on Earprov?
Oh boy. Let's see. Tomorrow we got American Master Debaters, the silliest debate show in town. And then on Saturday we have the Sweat List, the improvised stand-up comedy show. 5 stand-up comedians, 5 random topics, and 5 minutes at 8 p.m. earprov.com.
And also coming from the Push Comedy Theater in March, we will be releasing more details about this next week, but a little sneak peek. Again, why can't I speak tonight? Little sneak peek. We have the World Series of Improv, where improv teams and groups from all over the country will be competing. We will have groups from Second City. We'll have groups from Theater 99 in Charleston, South Carolina, Dad's Garage from Atlanta, groups from New York, LA will all be competing in the World Series of Improv. I just saw a comment. Something else that I would recommend going back is I'm all over the place tonight. I had way too much Mountain Dew today.
Just like Infinity.
Yeah. Stargirl. So there is a show on the CW called Stargirl, which is she is the new version of the Star Spangled Kid. She takes over his powers, and it is very much like Infinity Incorporated, where some of the sons and daughters of the Justice Society take on their powers. But unlike Infinity Incorporated, where you have college age kids, although they looked a lot older than college age, some of them, you have high school kids playing high schoolers with superpowers. And some of the members of the new Justice Society are Wildcat, Hourman, and Dr. Midnight, who all got their start in later issues of Infinity Incorporated. The first season is on the CW, and I believe the second season starts next month, and it's a really good show, so check it out. So that has been me all over the place. Kelly, thank you once again for finally making me break down and read Sandman. I sort of kind of appreciate it. I'm still on the fence, but we will see. Come back next week for the Black Panther, and please check out the Push Comedy Theater's Facebook page and Earprov's Facebook page for all the cool shows we have coming up in the next few weeks. For that, I am Sean Devereux.
And I am Kelly Vigilante, who's going to plug 2 things real quick.
Yeah,
the Horror podcast, Rob Holmes. I'm on it a lot. If you like horror, it's a lot of fun. Second thing, I believe Lemon Pepper in Saison, which is a all color improv troupe that is out of Push Comedy Theater has a show on the 27th. I will also be playing oh my god, like the one white girl in the show, I forget what it's called. Yeah,
Token.
that. Yes, Token. I will be the token white girl.
Nice. Very good. Very good. You can find, again, all that at earprov.com and on the Push Comedy Theater Facebook page. Matt, once again, thank you very much for running our tech. And we will see you next week with the Black Panther on the Funny Pages.